Welcome back. He waited patiently, and I'm really sorry, John. We'll never have you wait this long again. I blame Kim, to be perfectly honest. I don't.
That was a quick
probably shouldn't say it, but
Kim, how are you?
you know this man. He is a legend in the Bay Area and beyond. Last week on this show, he revealed an intention. That intention is to consider a mayoral run in the city of San Francisco. I don't know what's going to happen with that. That's not just the reasons here. But he did reveal that in conversation last time. But now, give it up for John Rothmann.
Yay.
John, you sexy fool, how are you?
I am splendid. How are you?
I'm well. I want your first thoughts on the Dominion-Fox settlement, if you would, please.
Politically, this is very important. But the most important single thing that happened is that Fox did not cover the settlement, as you pointed out earlier. I listened avidly to Fox to hear what they would say, whether Hannity or Carlson or Ingram or someone would say something, but not a word was uttered. I think it's a real blow to Fox. They are not through yet because there are several other lawsuits, including lawsuits made against individuals, including Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingram. It'll play out. But the important thing is that the Fox listeners, millions of people, had no idea that there was a settlement, no idea that Fox committed what I think was the horrific act of defending this kind of nonsense. So it's an interesting thing. Just quickly, because I know you have many other things, it shows the problem in America because you could listen to Fox and never know that any of this happened. And that's what's disturbing. There ought to be, if you really want to get to it, fair and balanced coverage, if I can use Fox's own terminology. They're neither fair nor balanced. And as you know, when I'm reluctant to use the term Fox and news, and I've said many times on my program and with you that it's an oxymoron.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, there's no question that, there are no words disparaging enough for what goes on over there and how they gaslit the public. But I was saying, John, that, this is about money. These suits, this is how we do stuff in this country. These suits, sure, you can suggest, not you personally, but it can be suggested that, it's about getting the truth out there and exposing these people for the lies they told and all this sort of thing. Dominion was in the business of, sure, building back their reputation, but also making Fox pay, putting a price tag on the damage to their reputation. And they went from worst to first. I mean, they went from a company that was a pretty small, voting tabulation company to now, this is a close to $1 billion company now.
Yeah.
As a result of this judgment. Yeah.
I have no objection to what you're saying, but I simply want to point out, I'm not interested in the money. I'm not interested in all of those implications. There's only one thing that I think we need to understand. Fox had to settle. If they hadn't settled, they would have paid an even steeper price. And the steeper price is coming because there are all these other lawsuits. And every single one of those lawsuits now will have to be settled or continued. I regret that Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson were not put on the witness stand. They belonged on the witness stand. But do you understand, Mark, the tragedy here is that millions of Americans not only don't know what happened, but will never hear about it. That people like Carlson and Hannity get away, in a sense, at this point, scot-free. By the way, did you hear any comment from major Republicans? No. Did you hear any comment from Donald Trump? No. And the most distressing thing is Governor DeSantis was in Washington yesterday, as I like to put it, he was in enemy territory, is he's not talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. And Fox continues to do the abominable things that they have done over the years. I told you, Mark, I suffer from low blood pressure. When I need stimulation, I listen to Fox.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough there to get you worked up. Well, as you just noted, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline when it comes to additional lawsuits, and so if you're concerned with getting that information out, it will get out there. You're not going to ever see Fox report on this stuff for all the reasons that you've detailed and beyond. And when I think about it, because I did also think that it would be a stipulation of this agreement that they'd have to issue some sort of on-air public apology. The fact that it wasn't there was a little bit of a surprise to me.
And a shame. It should have been, but we don't know the inner workings of the court. I don't know what the judge's thinking was. I don't know what the process was. I do know that in the end, Fox lost. And I want to emphasize that. They lost, and they lost big time. Can you imagine, Mark, if only we had done what Fox did and we had been sued by Dominion, why, this podcast would be a multi-billion-dollar operation. Just want to put that out.
Let me ask you again about something else, just to change gears here. Look, you've been in the Bay Area a long time. You've been in politics even longer. Not even longer, but just as also for big chunks of time, decades. And so I ask you, and I that's my little preamble to kind of suggest, well, I kind of see you, frankly, as, and I hope you won't take this in a bad way, but kind of a institutional Democrat in the sense that you believe in the systems that are in place. You've even noted that along the way, everything from the Federal Reserve to the way that the legislation gets made, But so against that backdrop, and please, you can take issue with any of that. But beyond that, against that backdrop, I ask you about Dianne Feinstein. I mean, it's starting to become a real big issue, John. And, you need that buy-in from the GOP that they didn't give you to allow her replacement on the Judiciary Committee. I'm wondering how you stand on this now and what should happen with Dianne Feinstein.
Leader McConnell made clear he's not going to help the Democrats on this. He's not going to help Dianne Feinstein on this. It's something Dianne has to wrestle with. Frankly, what the Republicans are doing makes perfect sense politically in terms of maneuvering, but it's a tragedy for America. And Dianne should be allowed to recuse herself from the committee. The Democrats should be able to put somebody else on. But, that's politics in Washington. Dianne is history. She's not going to be around much longer, either by the fact that she's not running for re-election or by virtue of other options which exist. But in the meantime, the whole country suffers and the judiciary suffers, and that's a tragedy. May I say, as someone who has been a friend of Dianne Feinstein's, I've known her all my life. I knew her father. I've known her husband. So it's just a tragic end for a great career.
Well, I'm trying to read between the lines there. I mean, I don't have the relationships that you do. That's why I kind of described you in that way, because you have strong relationships with a lot of various high-profile politicians around the Bay Area. And maybe Dianne Feinstein is the highest-profile politician in the Bay Area. She should get out. And she should get out. She's missed 50 votes, John Rothmann, and it's outrageous. And she does.
You're absolutely right. But remember, there is no way to remove her unless she voluntarily resigns. You can have everyone say she ought to. She's under no obligation to do so. So I'm a pragmatist, Mark. I understand that her career is almost done. I'd like to see it end honorably. I think the Democrats are going to have to really sit down with her. But the problem is nobody sees her. You understand that you can't get to her anymore. And so
what does that tell you? Politics is about caucusing. Politics is about working things out and stuff out.
It means
she's better than anyone.
She's almost 90 years old. She's in a term of office which cannot be shortened or changed unless she chooses to do it.
It's not a ceremonial office, though, John. It's a working office. She ought to get the hell out. It's outrageous.
Let me just say to you, you're saying she ought to, but that wasn't the question you posed to me. You posed to me what will happen, and I tried to answer you very directly, which I always do.
I said, what should happen with Dianne Feinstein?
In the end, it's up to her. She will have to make that decision.
Right. That was your answer to me before, and that's your answer now.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. I can't give you a better answer.
No, I get it. I understand. Okay, and I understand.
I had a number of listeners email Gavin Newsom and suggest that I be the interim senator, and I want you to know I'd be delighted to assume that responsibility too.
Well, so do you think she should resign so that you can ascend to her seat?
No selfish motives here. No, I think that it makes sense.
She should. She should, and you're playing it down the middle, and I don't blame you. But
no, it's not a question down the middle. She should resign. I don't mind saying that. But I know Dianne. If you pressure her, she won't.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
No. What has to happen is the leading Democrats have to go to her and tell her it's time. That's what has to happen. Public outcry, letters to the editor, comments by a radio talk show hosts and others are not going to influence her. In the end, and this is the other thing, I don't know whether she's really all compos mentis. I don't know whether she understands what's happening. So, what do you do in a situation like that? We've had other senators like this, by the way. This is not new. But before I know...
No, too many senators like this. That's the problem with this country. There's this thing where you get in and you can't get out, where you have such great power of incumbency, as you're well aware. But the idea somehow that she doesn't listen to a talk show host, she doesn't listen to letters to the editor, she doesn't listen to the hue and cry, that's the problem. That is what representation is. You have to listen to that stuff.
Mark, I don't know if she's capable of listening to this stuff. That's the problem.
All right.
And there is no way, I just want everyone to understand constitutionally, there is no way to remove her from office until her term expires or she chooses to leave. That's the reality. So all of the hue and cry means nothing. But you mentioned Clarence Thomas, and I did not want this to close without this. Please. Some of us are old enough to remember Abe Fortas, who I had the pleasure of meeting on several occasions. Abe Fortas was a great justice of the United States Supreme Court who accepted a gift from Wolfson, about $10,000, as I recall the amount. Earl Warren, who was then Chief Justice of the United States and a firm ally of Abe Fortas, went to him and said, "You have to step down. There's an ethics question here." And Abe Fortas did step down. Clarence Thomas should step down. He has committed ethical violations. Now, you may say, they're not ethical violations that are clearly stated in terms of the rules of the game. But I know an ethical violation. There was once a Supreme Court justice who was asked about pornography, and he says, "I know pornography when I see it." Well, I see what this situation is with Clarence Thomas, and there's no doubt in my mind that he ought to be removed from the court.
Well, he comes from regular stock.
I come from regular stock.
And
he likes Walmart. And he likes Walmart.
You know what?
That out.
Don't put it out. The parking lot's the best part of Walmart.
I prefer the Walmart parking lots.
Yeah. So look, the deal is with Thomas. First of all, it's almost quaint, the history, the Abe Fortas history, when people had a sense of the right thing and even the appearance of something that looks unethical. I mean, this guy Thomas is sneezing unethical stuff in an hour, well in excess of anything Abe Fortas did in a lifetime. And yet there's no shame.
Do you remember Justice Tom Connolly? He was appointed to the court or nominated to the court by Harry Truman. When his son, Ramsey Clark, became Attorney General of the United States under Lyndon Johnson, Tom Clark resigned from the court. He was still vigorous. He was still active. He still had visions, but he didn't want to see any perception of a conflict of interest. And it seems to me that the lessons of history ought to be told. One of the things that interests me and surprises me is I haven't heard a commentator, except for me, talk about the Abe Fortas case. They just don't, people don't remember. They don't have history. But
it is out there, but you're right. It hasn't been spoken of enough. And I'll tell you something else about the Abe Fortas case, since you brought it up. The Abe Fortas case, tell everybody, he was a Democrat. He was a liberal, if you want to call it a liberal justice. Who was president? And who was in power? What party was in power in the executive branch? Republicans were in power. No, Republicans were in power.
Step back. I'm sorry. Let's be clear. When Abe Fortas went to the court, he went to the court because of Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Sure.
And it was Johnson who nominated him. Johnson nominated him to succeed Earl Warren as Chief Justice.
And who did he resign under?
He resigned from the court under Nixon.
Exactly. In other words, thank you. That's the point I'm trying to make. He resigned from the court with a rival political party in control of that seat now. In other words, it would be like Clarence Thomas resigning now, right? You would have.
Let me take your analogy a step further.
Why are you yelling?
Yeah. Okay.
There was no one who detested Richard Nixon more than Earl Warren. But Earl Warren respected the Supreme Court. And it was Earl Warren who knew that when Fortas resigned, that Nixon would nominate a new justice. Despite the political differences, Earl Warren considered the ethics of the court above all else. So the timeline here, as you pointed out, is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And your father, if you talk to your father about it, I'm sure he'll tell you the same thing.
No, exactly. You know, my dad would know it too. But I'm just trying to make the point that, well, you know, you would never resign with the opposing party in charge of the executive. Fortas did resign with the opposing party in charge of the executive
100%.
branch. And 100%. So it's absolutely part of that history.
Why are you yelling?
So anyway, those days are over, John Rothmann. This guy, Thomas, he will be there to the bitter end. I mean, they could be stuffing hundreds into his pockets on his way to the chambers. And this guy is not leaving, and you know it, right?
Yeah. May I tell you, you're right. A Supreme Court justice remains in office for the term of life unless they choose to resign. There are some people who suggest there should be term limits on Supreme Court justices. I personally do not believe that. But there's a second aspect. Should there be a code of ethics for Supreme Court justices? And the answer is yes. But they are a self-policing group. They, you know, let's assume.
John, they don't police themselves, though. Why don't you feel as though there should be some limit on their term?
Well, I don't favor term limits because I know what that would mean. The independence of the court then is threatened. But I'll tell you what I do favor is a strict.
The independence of the court? I mean, right. My God, don't you think it's, John, please grant me that it is overgrown in terms of both power and politicization. It's absolutely out of control, the Supreme Court.
But that was the same argument, Mark, with all due respect, that Franklin Roosevelt raised in 1937. When
he might have been right in 1937.
Okay, but the point is the independence of the court is to me critical. So you're asking me a frank, honest question. What do we do? And the answer is there should be a code of ethics which the court establishes for itself. It is a self-governing body. And let me point out to you, the same thing applies in Congress. The Senate makes its own rules. The House makes its own rules. They make rules that work in the interests of their interest. And the same thing applies on the court. But what disturbs me is that people don't remember. By the way, we did have one justice of the Supreme Court who was impeached in 1805, and Aaron Burr actually presided at the impeachment trial, and that justice was acquitted. We've never had a judge on the court removed for any reasons.
But you need a 2/3. Not you'd be impossible now. You look back on those old days, John, the old days of the Aaron Burr. You look back on those days and wistfully, that was the great America when Aaron Burr was.
No, it's the precedent. And that to me is what's key. And you're right to laugh about it. Aaron Burr was no great thing, but remember he as a former vice president was indicted for treason and acquitted. The justice of the Supreme Court, Justice Marshall, John Marshall, the great Justice John Marshall, presided at his impeachment trial and found him not guilty because they didn't have all the evidence. That was fundamentally, but that's history. But I love
that's good. The history is always interesting. I think as you say, as you say, you know, you've got to know the history, at least be roughly acquainted with it to appreciate the predicament we're in now and maybe some of the solutions.
Let me remind people, your father is an expert on impeachment. He wrote a book on impeachment.
Yes, I'm very proud of his
program. A wonderful chat. And he said, Donald Trump is not going to be removed from office. And he explained to me very logically why. And it was based on his historical judgment. And he was absolutely correct. So my concern is that people look at history. Going back, if I can, to the Dominion case, the only thing that I felt badly about is part of that decision should have demanded that Fox concede that they were wrong. And I think that was the error. And I can't wait to hear, eventually there will be explanation as to why the judge did not. But
well, it's not the judge. I mean, it was a condition of the settlement, John. I mean, the attorneys make the deal. The judge
could have imposed, had he chosen to, part of that settlement. He could have said, I won't accept the settlement between the two of you unless you conform in a certain way.
But you know, the judges are always incentivized toward a sort of settlement, right, John Rothmann?
Don't argue with you at all. I'm just saying what I would like to have seen. I think it would have been cleaner. But this is not over, and I want people to understand. There are other lawsuits. There are other issues that are going to be raised, and there's no doubt in my mind that Fox is going to face the slings and arrows in the future.
I love when you say slings and arrows. So Shakespearean.
You do know that I'm off the next 2 weeks. I regret to
No,
say.
no.
Yes.
I did not know that, and this is an awful way for me to be told about it.
I
don't
sent you an
understand.
email.
How would you handle this? We could try ignoring it, sir.
I don't get
Sayonara,
this.
sucker!
It's outrageous.
My niece is getting married, and we're going, believe it or not, out of the country in order to we're going to Mexico, Mexico City, actually. So,
But
that's
there's no
the reason I'm
Wi-Fi
here.
in Mexico? Come on.
Not-
Why are you doing
if I have a choice between being with you and Kim and Albert,
Aw.
missing
You know-
the rehearsal dinner, if you think I'm going to get in trouble with my wife, you are dead wrong.
Well, look, I'm taking it hard, but probably the person taking it hardest is the Kamala Harris finger puppet. Really?
Oh, no.
Yes. Oh, John, you gave me my first interview on KGO. I'll miss you for 2 weeks.
You will,
All right.
but I'll be back.
All right. We love you, John
Who said
Rothmann.
that? Wait a minute, who said that? I'll be back. Who said that?
I'll be back. Screw
right.
your freedom. That's what he's always in there.
Screw your freedom.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
who knows, Mark? I want you to keep a running list so that when we sit together 3 weeks from today, when you have that
Yes, sir.
running list of everything I missed, we may need more than a half an hour to cover it all.
Wow. I will
What?
keep a running list. We love your takes. Bye-bye, John Rothmann. Thanks for being here. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.